Dan Harper, a 38-year-old architect, lived what most would call a charmed life in Charleston, South Carolina. His two-story home on a quiet street, with its white picket fence and a porch swing that swayed lazily in the low-country breeze, felt like something out of Southern novel. The swing was a relic of happier times, bought with Emily, his wife of 8 years, when they first moved in. They'd spent countless evenings there, sipping sweet tea and dreaming aloud about kids, a trip to Italy, maybe a sailboat one day. But lately, the swing creaked alone, and the dreams had faded into silence. Dan wasn't blind to the changes. Emily, 36, a marketing manager at a local firm, had always been vibrant, the kind of woman who could light up a room with a laugh. But over the past 6 months, something had shifted. She traded her cozy cardigans for sleek workout gear, claiming a sudden passion for evening runs. "Just need to clear my head," she'd say, slipping out the door with her neon sneakers. Dan didn't mind at first. He admired her drive. But then came the new perfume, sharp and floral, not the soft vanilla he'd gifted her for their anniversary. She wore it daily now, even at casual dinners. And her phone? Always buzzing, always angled just out of his sight, her fingers quick to lock the screen when he walked by. He tried to shrug it off. Marriage had its seasons, he told himself. They'd survived the lean years, his late nights at the firm, her stress over corporate deadlines, the fights over bills that left them both raw. They'd come out stronger, or so he thought. Emily still kissed him goodbye each morning, still left him notes on the fridge, picked up your favorite coffee. "Love you." Dan clung to those gestures like lifelines, proof their foundation was solid. But doubt, quiet and insidious, had started to creep in. It was a Wednesday when it all unraveled. Dan had been in Atlanta for a client pitch, a grueling 2-day affair of PowerPoints and 4 smiles. The meeting wrapped early, and instead of staying the night as planned, he booked a late flight home. He wanted to surprise Emily. At a boutique near Peachtree Street, he picked up a bag of her favorite coffee, small batch, dark roast, the kind she said tasted like happiness in a mug. He pictured her face lighting up, imagined them sharing a cup on the porch, talking like they used to. The thought carried him through the flight, the drive, the quiet pull into their driveway just before 11 p.m. The house looked normal, bathed in the glow of the porch light. But something fell off. The front door was unlocked, strange for Emily, who'd once checked the deadbolt 3 times before bed, laughing off Dan's teasing about overzealous raccoons. He stepped inside, the familiar scent of her perfume mingling with something new. Red wine, rich and unfamiliar. Soft music drifted from upstairs, an acoustic playlist he didn't recognize. His grip tightened on the coffee bag as he moved through the living room, his footsteps muffled on the hardwood. Then he heard it, her laugh, bright and unguarded, followed by a man's voice, low and warm. The sound stopped him at the base of the stairs. It wasn't loud, just intimate like a shared secret. His pulse quickened, not with anger but with a cold, creeping disbelief. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last, the coffee bag now a dead weight in his hand. The bedroom door was half open, soft light spilling through the crack. He pushed it gently and froze. Emily sat on the edge of their bed, legs tucked beneath her, wearing his old Clemson hoodie and pajama shorts. A glass of wine rested in her hand, not their usual chipped mugs, but the crystal flutes from their wedding registry. Candles flickered on the dresser, casting a warm glow. Across from her, in Dan's reading chair, sat Ryan, her coworker. Dan had met him once at a company picnic, tall, polished, the kind of guy who wore tailor blazers and too much cologne. Ryan was leaning forward, smiling, a wine glass in his hand, as if he belonged there. They both froze when they saw Dan. Emily's glass wobbled as she set it down, her voice pitching high. "Done? You're early." Ryan stood quickly, smoothing his shirt, avoiding eye contact. "Hey, done? Just, going over some work stuff. Q4 campaign." Dan's eyes swept the room. No laptops, no papers, just wine, candles, and that damn playlist. "Work stuff," he repeated, his voice flat. "At midnight. In my house." Emily's lips tightened, not with guilt, but with irritation. "You're making this weird," she said. "It's just dinner. You don't need to overreact." Weird. The word landed like a slap. Ryan muttered something about leaving, brushing past Dan with a nod so weak it barely existed. The front door clicked shut downstairs, and Dan stood in the doorway, staring at his wife. Her eyes were wide, defiant, not a trace of remorse. "Why was the door unlocked?" he asked quietly. She blinked. "I forgot." "You don't forget," he said. "Ever." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Dan held up the coffee bag, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brought your favorite." Her gaze dropped to her lap. He turned and walked out, the bag still in his hand, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. That night, Dan didn't sleep. He sat in his car in the driveway, the coffee untouched on the passenger seat, staring at the house that no longer felt like home. The porch swing swayed in the wind, its creak a faint reminder of promises long faded. Emily's words, "You're overreacting," looped in his mind, each replay cutting deeper. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the scene he'd walked into or the ease with which she'd dismissed it. One thing was clear. The life he thought they had was a lie, and he was done pretending otherwise. Dan Harper sat at the kitchen table the next morning, the untouched bag of coffee from Atlanta mocking him from the counter. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and hum. Emily had left for work before dawn. Her usual note, "Have a great day, love you," stuck to the fridge. But the words felt hollow now, like a script she hadn't bothered to rehearse. Dan's coffee mug, cold in his hands, mirrored the chill settling in his chest. Last night's scene replayed relentlessly. Emily's defiant eyes, Ryan's smug ease, the candles flickering like they were in on the lie. He didn't go to work. He couldn't. He called his boss, mumbled something about a migraine, and paced the house instead. Every room felt alien, as if someone had tilted the world just enough to make it unrecognizable. The living room, where they'd binge-watched old movies, now held the ghost of Ryan's voice. The bedroom, their sanctuary, reeked of betrayal. Dan's mind churned, piecing together moments he'd ignored, small shifts he'd chalked up to life's ebb and flow. Hindsight was a brutal lens, and it was sharpening fast. 3 months ago, Emily had taken up running. Out of nowhere. She'd always hated it. Once joking she'd only sprint if a bear was chasing her or there was free cake at the finish line. Yet one day, she came home with bright teal running shoes and a gym membership. "New challenge," she'd said, shrugging off Dan's raised eyebrow. He'd admired her commitment, even offered to join her. "I need solo time," she'd replied, her tone light but firm. He hadn't pushed. Now, he cursed himself for it. The neon leggings, the post-run selfie she never shared with him, the way she'd skipped dinner some nights, claiming she was fueling differently. It all screamed something he'd refused to hear. Then there was the perfume. Not the soft scent he'd known for years, but a bold, expensive one she wore constantly now. He'd found the bottle in her drawer, half-hidden, no gift tag. And her phone, God, her phone. The way she'd smile at it, her thumbs dancing over the screen, only to flip it face down when Dan entered the room. "We're chat," she'd say, waving it off. Ryan and Lisa being ridiculous. Always Ryan. Dan remembered a night a month back when her phone buzzed on the counter while she showered. He hadn't snooped, but the screen lit up, Ryan's smiling face with sunglasses. 3 messages. Dan had swallowed the unease, told himself he wasn't that guy. The jealous husband, the one who checks texts. Now, he wished he'd been exactly that guy. The worst memory hit like a punch. 2 weeks ago, Emily had said she was staying late for a team call with her firm's New York office. She might crash at her co-worker Lisa's place, she'd added, since it had run past midnight. Dan, half asleep, had nodded. "Text me if you stay out," he'd mumbled. She'd kissed his cheek and left. But at 1 a.m., something, instinct maybe, had woken him. He'd opened the car's GPS app, a shared feature they'd set up after a break-in scare years ago. Her car wasn't at her office or Lisa's. It was parked at a boutique hotel across town, the kind with overpriced cocktails and dim lighting. He'd stared at the blinking dot, willing it to be a glitch. Maybe she'd lent a car to someone. Maybe she'd taken an Uber. Anything but the truth. When she came home the next morning with muffins and a smile, saying the call ran long, Dan had kissed her back and said nothing. He'd blamed himself, convinced he was inventing drama where there was none. Now, sitting in the kitchen, that self-doubt burned away. Emily's words from last night, "You're making this weird," weren't just a deflection, they were a blade. She'd looked at him, her husband, and chosen to lie. Dan stood, his chair scraping the floor, and moved to the study. Emily's old tablet, forgotten in a drawer for over a year, caught his eye. She hadn't used it since getting a new one, but it was still synced to her cloud. His hands shook as he plugged it in. Part of him screamed to stop, to leave it alone, but the part that needed truth was louder. The tablet powered on, and within minutes, he was in her messages. A buried thread with Ryan, months old, stared back at him. "You make me laugh like I haven't in years," she'd written. "Dan's been so distant lately. I feel invisible." Another from a night Dan had been home cooking her favorite pasta. "Wish I was with you instead. He doesn't get me anymore." The words gutted him. Not just the betrayal, but the way she'd rewritten him. Cold, absent, a shadow of the man he tried to be. He'd been working late to save for her dream trip to Santorini, planning her birthday, believing they were building something. And she turned him into a villain to justify her choices. Dan closed the tablet, his breath shallow. The messages confirmed what his gut had screamed. This wasn't a one-off. It was deliberate, layered, a story she'd been crafting behind his back. But he needed more than texts. He needed proof that couldn't be waved away with a shrug and "you're overreacting." He grabbed his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in years. Keith, an old college buddy turned private investigator in Atlanta. Keith had once said, "Truth isn't about catching them. It's about knowing you're not crazy." Dan needed that now. He dialed. Keith picked up on the second ring, his voice warm but surprised. "Dan Harper, as I live and breathe." "What's up, man?" "Den Ek Shaled. I need your help. It's personal." A pause, then Keith's tone shifted, all business. "Lay it on me." Dan spilled it all, the unlocked door, the wine, Ryan, the tablet. His voice cracked once, but he pushed through. "Kate, listen, no interruptions." When Dan finished, Keith sighed. Man, I'm sorry. You want answers? I got a guy in Charleston. Discreet, thorough. You in?" Dan didn't hesitate. "I'm in." By evening, Keith had connected him with Jorge, a former detective with a no-nonsense vibe. Jorge didn't pry, just asked for specifics. Emily's car, work schedule, a photo, her habits. Dan sent it all, his stomach twisting with guilt. It felt like a betrayal of its own, but Emily had crossed that line first. As he hit send, the porch swing creaked outside, a faint echo of the life he thought they'd had. He wasn't just fighting for truth now. He was fighting for himself. Dan Harper's world had become a tightrope, each step a balance between rage and restraint. A week had passed since he'd hired Jorge, the private investigator, and the waiting was a slow burn. The Charleston house, once a haven, now felt like a stage where he and Emily played parts in a crumbling script. She was trying too hard, maybe. Notes on the fridge multiplied. "Made your favorite lasagna. Let's talk tonight." She'd linger in the kitchen, offering small smiles, suggesting a movie like nothing had happened. But her eyes betrayed her, darting away when Dan looked too long, as if she feared he'd see through her. He nodded, kept his responses vague, and waited for Jorge's call. Truth was his only anchor now. Dan's days were mechanical. He went to the architecture firm, sketched designs, smiled at clients, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the tablet messages, Emily's voice saying "you're overreacting." The porch swing outside creaked in the evening breeze, a reminder of the life he'd thought was real. He'd stopped sleeping in their bedroom, opting for the guest room's lumpy mattress. Emily didn't comment, but her silence spoke volumes. She knew something had shifted, but Dan wasn't ready to show his hand. Not yet. The call came on a muggy Thursday morning, just as Dan was leaving for work. Jorge's voice was steady, clinical. "Got movement. You want the details now or in person?" Dan's grip tightened on his phone, his pulse spiking. "Now," he said, pulling his car to the side of the road. Jorge didn't sugarcoat it. Tuesday evening, Emily left work at 5:15. Drove to the Indigo Hotel on King Street. Checked in under her maiden name, Carter. Ryan showed up 10 minutes later, brown jacket, glasses. They hugged in the lobby, went upstairs together. Stayed 3 hours. She left alone. He used the back exit. Got photos, timestamps, footage. Dan's throat was sandpaper. "You're sure it was Ryan?" "Positive," Jorge said. "Matches the banquet photo you sent." No one else was with them. Dan closed his eyes, the image of Emily's green coat, the one he'd bought her last Christmas, flashing in his mind. "Send me the photos," he said, his voice hollow. Jorge emailed them within the hour. Dan opened the folder at a red light, his hands unsteady. There she was, hair tucked behind her ear, a nervous habit, smiling at Ryan in the hotel lobby. He held the elevator door, his hand brushing hers, the gesture so casual it screamed familiarity. Another shot showed them in the parking lot, Ryan's arm around her waist. It wasn't a fling. It was a routine. The photos were a gut punch, but they weren't the only blow. That evening, while Emily was at a team meeting, Dan rummaged through her desk, driven by a need to understand how far this went. Tucked in a folder of old receipts, he found something that stopped him cold. A letter from a divorce attorney, addressed to Emily, dated 2 weeks ago. It outlined preliminary steps for asset division, mentioning the house and their joint savings. A sticky note in her handwriting was attached. Confirmed timeline with R. Dan's blood ran cold. Not only was she cheating, she was planning to leave him to take the house they'd built together, maybe with Ryan whispering in her ear. The discovery flipped a switch in Dan. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated exit strategy. He called Keith, his PI friend in Atlanta, needing a sounding board. She's not just stepping out, Dan said, his voice tight. She's trying to rewrite the ending, make me the bad guy, and walk away with everything. Keith whistled low. That's cold, man. You need to play smart now. Get a lawyer, protect your assets. And there's something else. Jorge dug into Ryan. Guy's married, got a wife, 2 kids, big house in Mount Pleasant. He's done this before, charming his way through co-workers. His wife doesn't know yet. Dan's mind raced. Ryan wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a predator with his own secrets. The thought of his wife, oblivious like Dan had been, sparked something new. Not vengeance, but a sense of justice. He wasn't the only one being played. But the lawyer angle stuck with him most. Emily's plan to blindside him with divorce papers, to claim the house he'd poured his savings into, felt like a second betrayal, sharper than the first. That night, Dan met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Carla, who specialized in family law. Over coffee in her downtown office, he laid out everything. The affair, the photos, the attorney letter. Carla's eyes narrowed as she skimmed the documents. She's banking on you not fighting back, she said. South Carolina's a fault-based divorce state. Infidelity can sway asset division, alimony, the works. If you've got proof, and it sounds like you do, you can protect the house and your savings. But you need to act fast. She's already got a head start. Carla suggested a bold move. Transfer the house title to a trusted family member temporarily, like Dan's sister, to shield it from Emily's claims. It was legal, ethical, and a way to level the playing field. Dan hesitated, the idea feeling like a chess move in a game he never wanted to play. But the memory of Emily's hand and Ryan's, her signature on that attorney letter, pushed him forward. He nodded. Do it. As Carla drafted the paperwork, Dan's phone buzzed. A text from Emily, late night at work. Don't wait up. XO. The XO was a knife twist. He didn't reply, just stared at the screen, wondering how many late nights had been lies. Jorge's photos flashed in his mind, but so did Keith's words about Ryan's wife. Dan wasn't ready to confront Emily yet. He needed her to think she was still in control. But Ryan's wife deserved to know, and that seed of an idea took root. Back home, Dan sat in the guest room, the house dark except for the glow of his laptop. He opened Jorge's email again, studying the photos, the timestamps, the undeniable truth. The porch swing creaked outside, a faint echo of the life he'd lost. But something else was growing in him now, not just pain but resolve. Emily had made her choices. Ryan had played his part. Now it was Dan's turn to rewrite the story, not with anger, but with clarity. He wasn't just fighting for the house or his pride. He was fighting for the truth and for the man he still wanted to be. Dan Harper had become a man of calculated moves, each step deliberate, like an architect drafting a blueprint for survival. The Charleston house, once a symbol of love, now felt like a battlefield, its quiet rooms heavy with unspoken truths. Emily's attempts at normalcy, her sticky notes, her forced smiles, her offers to talk things out, only deepened Dan's resolve. The divorce attorney's letter, the hotel photos, and the messages on her tablet were no longer just wounds. They were weapons. He wasn't the naive husband who'd walked in with coffee anymore. He was a man ready to reclaim his life. With Carla, his lawyer, Dan had taken the first step, transferring the house title to his sister, Lauren, a legal maneuver to shield it from Emily's plans. Carla had been clear. South Carolina courts favored the wrong spouse in infidelity cases, but Dan needed to stay strategic. Don't confront her yet, Carla advised. Let her think she's still pulling the strings. Dan agreed, though every day of pretending was a test of endurance. Emily's texts, grabbing dinner with Lisa tonight, back late, felt like taunts, each one a reminder of her double life with Ryan. But Dan kept his cool, replying with neutral sounds good messages, his silence a shield. Jorge, the private investigator, had sent more updates. Emily and Ryan's hotel meetups were regular, always under her maiden name, always at boutique spots where discretion was the draw. Dan didn't open the new photos. He didn't need to. The first set, Emily's smile, Ryan's hand on her waist, were burned into his mind. Instead, he focused on Keith's revelation about Ryan's wife, Megan. A schoolteacher with 2 young kids, she was clueless about her husband's affairs. Dan felt a kinship with her, a shared wound. He wasn't ready to reach out yet, but the idea of exposing Ryan's lies to her simmered, a spark waiting for the right moment. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Emily's company was hosting a gala to celebrate a major client win, a black tie event at the Harborview Hotel downtown. She mentioned it casually over breakfast, swirling her coffee. It's just work people, lots of schmoozing. You'd hate it, she said, her tone light but her eyes avoiding his. Ryan's presenting some analytics thing. Total snooze. The name Ryan landed like a stone. Dan nodded, forcing a smile. Sounds riveting. Emily relaxed, her shoulders easing as if she'd dodged a bullet. He saw it then, the confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. That evening, as Emily left in a navy dress that hugged her frame, a new one, not from their shared closet, Dan made his move. He waited until her car's taillights vanished, then changed into a crisp button-down and jacket, nothing flashy, just enough to blend into the gala's crowd. From the kitchen counter, he grabbed a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, the same kind Emily always ordered on their date nights in Asheville. It felt like a quiet act of defiance, a nod to the man he'd been before her lies. He drove to the hotel, parking a block away, his heart thudding but his hands steady. The Harborview's banquet hall glowed through floor-to-ceiling windows, string lights casting a warm haze over the crowd of suits and sequins. Dan slipped in through a side entrance, bypassing the check-in table. No one questioned him. He moved with purpose, keeping to the edges of the room. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the storm inside him. He spotted Emily near the bar, radiant in her dress, her laugh carrying over the chatter. Ryan stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, the other resting casually on her lower back. The sight didn't shock Dan anymore, it confirmed. Their ease, their closeness, was practiced, comfortable like a dance they perfected. Dan watched from a distance, blending into the crowd as a speaker droned on about synergy and growth. Emily leaned into Ryan, whispering something that made him grin, his fingers grazing her arm. It was subtle, but to Dan, it screamed intimacy. He felt the weight of the wine bottle in his hand, the cool glass grounding him. This wasn't about a scene or a showdown. It was about clarity, about ending the charade on his terms. He approached their table slowly, his steps measured. They didn't notice him at first, too lost in their bubble. Dan set the wine bottle down with a soft clink, the label facing them. Emily turned, her smile freezing as her eyes met his. The color drained from her face, her glass wobbling in her hand. Ryan straightened, his smirk faltering. Dan reached into his jacket pocket, where his wedding ring hung on a chain around his neck. He'd stopped wearing it after the hotel photos, a quiet act of self-preservation. Now he unclasped it, slid the ring off, and placed it beside the bottle. A note, folded neatly, followed. You chose him. I choose myself. Dan, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan opened his mouth, but Dan's gaze, calm, unflinching, silenced him. The room hadn't stopped, but the air around their table felt charged, a few nearby guests glancing over. Dan didn't speak. He didn't need to. The ring, the wine, the note said everything. He turned and walked out, the soft click of the banquet hall door behind him louder than any shout. Outside, the Charleston night was humid, the harbor's salt air sharp in his lungs. Dan stood on the curb, hands in his pockets, staring at the hotel's glowing windows. The gala continued, but he knew he'd shattered something inside. Emily's face, shock, not guilt, told him she hadn't expected him to fight back. Ryan's unease hinted at a man who knew his house of cards was wobbling. Dan drove home, the empty passenger seat where the wine had been a small victory. The porch swing creaked as he pulled into the driveway, but he didn't look at it. That life was gone. Back in the guest room, Dan opened his laptop and drafted an email to Carla, attaching Jorge's photos and the attorney letter. File the divorce papers, he wrote. No delays. Then he pulled up Megan's contact info, found through Keith's digging. He didn't send anything yet, but the draft sat open, a single line. You deserve to know the truth about Ryan. Dan leaned back, the weight of his choices settling. He wasn't just protecting himself now. He was dismantling the lies, piece by piece, and the next move would be his boldest yet. Dan Harper stood at the edge of his Charleston life, the house behind him a shell of memories he no longer recognized. The confrontation at the Gala had been a quiet detonation, its ripples spreading through the days that followed. Emily's face, pale, stunned, haunted him, not with regret, but with clarity. She'd chosen her path, and Dan had chosen his. The porch swing creaked in a morning breeze, but he didn't glance back as he loaded the last of his boxes into his car. The house was no longer his anchor. It was a chapter he was ready to close. Emily had found the note and his wedding ring on the gala table, and by the time she returned home that night, Dan was already in the guest room, door locked. She knocked, her voice soft, pleading. Dan, please. Let's talk. He didn't answer. The next morning, he found her key on the kitchen counter, her toothbrush gone, half her closet empty. She'd left a note of her own. I'm staying with Lisa. I didn't mean for this. No apology, just deflection. Dan crumpled it and tossed in the trash. Her absence didn't ease the ache. It sharpened it, but it also freed him to act. Carla, his lawyer, moved swiftly. The divorce papers were filed, citing Emily's infidelity with Jorge's photos and tablet messages as evidence. South Carolina's fault-based system gave Dan leverage, and the house, now in his sister's name, was safe from Emily's claims. Carla warned that Emily's attorney might push back, but Dan's proof was ironclad. She'll settle, Carla said. She knows she's cornered. Dan nodded, feeling not triumph, but a quiet resolve. He wasn't fighting to punish Emily. He was fighting to reclaim his dignity. The bigger move came with Ryan. Dan had wrestled with the idea of contacting Megan, Ryan's wife, torn between justice and restraint. But Keith's words echoed. Truth isn't about catching them. It's about knowing you're not crazy. Megan deserved that truth, just as Dan had. He crafted a careful email, attaching Jorge's photos and a brief note. I'm sorry to send this. Your husband has been unfaithful with my wife. You deserve to know. He sent it anonymously, using a burner email Keith set up, and waited. 2 days later, Keith called with news. Megan's filing for divorce. Ryan's been suspended from work. Word got out. His reputation's toast. Dan exhaled, a weight lifting. Ryan's charmed life, built on lies and tailor blazers, was unraveling. Megan's decision wasn't Dan's victory, but it was justice, a consequence Ryan couldn't dodge. Emily called that same week, her voice shaky. Dan, can we talk? I messed up. I ended things with Ryan. He listened, letting her words hang in the silence. It's too late, he said finally. You didn't just break us, you broke me. I'm done. He hung up, her sobs cut off by the click. For the first time, he felt no guilt, only the clarity of a man who'd drawn a line. The house sold quickly. Dan didn't want it, couldn't live in its ghosts. The proceeds, split fairly after Carla's negotiations, gave him a clean slate. He chose Portland, Oregon, for his fresh start, a city of rain and reinvention, far from Charleston's humid weight. He rented a small craftsman with a porch, no swing this time, just a chair where he could sip coffee and think. His new job at a boutique architecture firm felt like a return to the passion he'd lost in corporate grind. The first project, a community center, something that mattered. Emily sent one last email, weeks after the divorce finalized. I'm sorry, Dan. I lost myself. I hope you're okay. He didn't reply. Her words were too little, too late, and he no longer needed her validation. Ryan, he heard through Keith, had moved to Atlanta. His career stalled, his social circle fractured. Megan was rebuilding, her kids her focus, and Dan felt a quiet respect for her strength. The truth had cost them all, but it had also freed them. On his first Portland morning, Dan sat on his porch, a mug of dark roast in hand, the same kind he'd bought for Emily, now a symbol of his own resilience. The air was crisp, the city waking around him. He thought of the gala, the ring, the note. That moment hadn't been about revenge. It had been about choosing himself. The pain of Emily's betrayal lingered, but it no longer defined him. He'd walk through the fire and come out whole, not hardened but hopeful. The moral wasn't loud or vengeful. It was simple. Truth, wielded with purpose, could dismantle lies without destroying the one who held it. Dan had protected his heart, his home, and his future. not with anger, but with quiet, lawful steps. As he watched the Portland skyline glow in the dawn, he smiled, small but real. The past was gone, the Swings Creek a distant memory. Ahead was a life he'd build on his terms, one honest choice at a time.